Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from graphicinmotion.com and it is tutorial time again. Today we will create this really cool looking stock chart animation that you see here, and we are going to use pretty simple techniques in Stardust to create this complex digital style stock chart. So let's jump right into After Effects and let's get started. So the first step is to create a new composition, and as always I will use the HDTV 1080 preset and I will call this my chart main and I will make it about 20 seconds long. Now let me create a new solid and I will call this my chart mask. So the technique behind this is to create a mask that represents the path of our stock chart, and then we will use this mask to emit particles on it. So let's go to our pen tool and let's start drawing a quick shape here. And first of all, I will just create something like a guide layer, and this will just help me to position my chart, just to make it easier to create a nice animation, a nice camera animation later on. So I will just create 2 points here now. So a mask with 2 points and just stylize it something like that so that we have a nice path here. Okay, and now I will just click away and create another mask. And now the second one actually will be my real chart mask. So let me just put in a few points here, like masks or like these charts usually. They are going up and down a bit, but over the time we want this to rise. You know, if you're lucky, then your stock does this, your investment gains on value. And if you have a bad day then, or bad luck, then it looks like this. Can happen. But in our case, we want to be a bit more optimistic. So I will just delete these points here. And we'll just end our chart on this high here, on this high value. Now I want to add a few more details here, so a few more points. And now I can also delete my guide mask here. So let me just delete this. And now I will come in here and again with my pen tool, I will just add a few more points and give this a bit more variation. And I will speed up this process and I will be back with the finished result. Okay, so now I created my mask that I will use to create my path, and you see I just added a few more points here and just shifted them a bit. And one more hint, only use linear points. So we do not want smooth curves here. We want edges here like these peaks and stuff. Okay, now it's time to create a new layer, and this will be our Stardust layer. So let's add Stardust to this layer. And I will just change the color here of this layer so that I know that this is my Stardust layer. Okay. And in the Stardust settings, in the emitter settings, I now have to tell Stardust that we want to use this mask on this layer to create particles. And therefore we can change the type from text to mask. And now in these properties down here, the layer properties, I can change this to chart mask. And you see something happened, but it's not really what we want. So it's not emitting particles only on our mask. And this is because of this distribution. Here we have volume, and I want this to be edge weighted actually. And I also want to set the speed to 0 and the size on set to 0. And now it is only emitting particles along my path. But I do not want them to emit all the time. You see that this creates this kind of a flickering effect because the particles die after 2 seconds. So let's increase their lifespan for, let's say 25, just a little bit more than our composition. And also I do not want these to emit the whole time. So I want to change the emitting type from default to sequence. And now you see what this does. So now it is creating this nice line animation for me. But you also see that now it's not animating through the whole path, and this is because of our particles per second here. So I can now change the speed of this growth here using the particles per second. But before I do that, I want to subdivide my path a little bit better, because now you see we have this stroke, which can be cool if you want to create an animated stroke, but I want this dotted line look. So I have to add a few subdivisions here. So let's go to the path subdivide and let's put in something like, let me see, not quite sure, like 20 maybe, because I also want to make the particles way smaller actually. So we'll go to my particle properties, set this to 2 for now. Now they are very small. Maybe I will go with 3, like so. And let me see whether this works. And I think from the style point of view it works. And I'm not sure about the animation, so let me see how this does now. And yeah, now it's animating very, very quickly because we emit 100 particles per second, and I don't know, there are not too many. There are about 200 probably on this line here. So let's turn this down to maybe something like 30. And let's see how long this takes now to animate, and still too much. So let's say 10. Because I want this to animate just like around, yeah, 15, 16 seconds. So I will just turn this down even further. So let's say 8. And now I think that my animation should be perfect. Okay, this is cool. Now you see that we have particles, and these particles are now animating over time along our path. You could, of course, use different techniques to achieve this effect. You do not have to take the sequence effect. You could also use emit once, and then it will emit once or all particles at once. And then you can use something like the trim path, or actually you also can animate this using fields. But in my case, I want to use this sequence because there is one thing that I really like. And this is now I can use the overtime features in my particle. And actually, I want these particles not to pop up like they do now. If you take a look, they're just appearing. And I want these to scale in. And I can use the life over time to do that. So let's go to our particle settings and let's go into over life settings. And now I can just change the size graph here. And I will use one of the presets. And in this case, I want this preset here and add it. And now you see that we have this slight fading going on here, and this is exactly the look that I want to achieve. But I want to adjust this curve a bit so that the fade is not that long, a little bit shorter. Let me see. Something like that looks pretty cool. And now you see that these particles just fade on. And if I make them bigger just for a moment to make this more obvious, you see what's happening here. So that they're scaling in. And this is exactly the effect that I want to achieve. Okay, cool. So now we have one line, one dotted line following along our chart path. And this is pretty cool. But we also want to get in some color here. And I want to colorize these along the path. So how to do that? You see in the particle settings, I have this option here, particle color. And if I change this now from color over path, then you see something's happening, and this is because right now there is a gradient in it. And usually we use the color gradient here to specify the color of the particles, but this time, because we are working over a path, we need these path properties here. And you see I can change the color here, the size, the opacity, so there are many options here to stylize your particles along this path. And if I use preset here, let's say I just want to use maybe this one for now, and apply it, and now you see that along our path the particles will change the color. And I could introduce some more colors here, and you know, to get a bit of variation in here maybe, like so, and a little bit of blue here, and maybe one more. Good, now I've created colors along my path. So this is my main line for my chart, and now I want to add different particles. The next particles I want to introduce are numbers. And to do that we need some custom particles. So if you have already watched a few of my tutorials, you know how to do that. And today we will use a bit of another technique. We will make our life a little bit easier this time. Let me create a new layer for now. And this will be my background. So we'll just call it BG. And just drag this right down here below my Stardust layer. Again, color it different way. And I will also add Stardust to this because I also want to use Stardust to create my background. But this time we will use a preset, and I will go to these hard elements, and there are pretty cool ones, and I will use this one that's called data wall. And if I replace this now in my BG layer, and then there's this error because actually this font here is missing on my system, but this doesn't really matter because After Effects will just replace it with another font, and you see what we get, and we actually get something like I'm creating now, but it is not really a stock chart, it's just an animating like data graph. And I do not need all of these here in my scene. What I really want is this background here. So I will just delete all of these elements here because these are actually forming this data wall. And if you want to know how this is built, then you can of course check this out. I only want these 3 or 4 nodes here. And this is just an emitter, grid emitter, and all these particles that you see in the background right here. And you see we have these small numbers here. And I also want to use these numbers now along my path. So how can we do that? If you take a look at your timeline, you see that Stardust created this composition that was not there before. And if we open this up, you see this is just 15 seconds long composition with random numbers on every frame, on each frame. So I will just change my font here a bit more of a digital font. I use this digital 7 font. You can download this from the internet. And now I will go to my main Stardust layer, so my Stardust layer, and I will turn off the background for now because now I do not need it. And I want to create, and actually now you see that my Stardust panel here is locked to the background. And if I unlock this right here with this small symbol, then it will jump over, to my emitter here. Okay. So to add these numbers now as particles, I will just duplicate this particles node that I already have got here. And I will call this numbers. And now let's rearrange this a bit here. Link it to my emitter. And now I just created a second set of particles that is exactly the same as the first one. But now I want to change a few settings. So first of all, I do not want a circle, I want a texture. And I want to specify this texture now with this layer here. And I want to use the numbers as texture. And I want to use random still frames here. And instead of texture color use default, I want to use the alpha. So I want that Stardust only uses the alpha and doesn't colorize the particles with the texture with the color of the texture. I want it to colorize it with the colors that I specify. And if I increase the size now, there's still nothing visible. So maybe I need to increase these further to 60. And now you start to see these small numbers here. I think this is a little bit too small. So let's go with 80. And I think that this should be fine. But now I have two things I don't like. I have the same color as my chart mask path here, and I have too many of them. So to reduce the amount of these particles, we can use the feature called birth chance. And this is something like a percent value, I guess. So you can reduce this to get less of these. But I think these are not enough. So let me increase this back again to maybe something like 20. And this looks quite good. And I can, of course, also shift the seed now here using this. So let's shift it a bit to get a bit more of an even distribution. It's always a bit of a luck. I think this is okay. Maybe, let's see. Yeah, this looks quite good. Okay, so now I have my numbers in here. And now I want these to have different colors. So I can just change this. I do not want these to be colorized over the path. I want these to just feature two different colors. So I will go to my particle properties and I will change it from color over path to random from gradient. And now I can use my standard color gradient here, and I will just add two colors. And I want to add a greenish color and one reddish color. And this is because usually in these charts, green means buy, red means sell. So that means when somebody is buying, then it's displayed green. And when somebody is selling stocks, then it's displayed red. And if I set this to hold, now I can control how many of these are green and how many of these are red. And of course, we will never get, as I said, a real representation with this, using this technique. It's an illustration, an abstract. But I can specify that more of my numbers are green than red, and our chart is growing all the time. So it's just something like logical that there are more green ones than red ones in my scene. So I will just leave this here, the green space in my gradient a little bit bigger than my red space. Then I want to go back to my seed here and shift it a bit, actually, because I do not like what I have got here. But I like this one. This looks really good. Okay, so I have my colors set and I have my particles distribution right. And now I want to change the position of these. To change the position, I will just use a transform node and link it to these particles. And I will just use this here to shift them up a bit on Y. So we will use the Y position. And let's see how much I need here. I need negative values, of course. And this is way too much. So I guess I need something like -50. And this looks not too bad. Actually, I think they're a little bit too big. So let me come in here and change the size back to 70. Even maybe 65. Okay. Now I want to create a connection between my numbers and my chart, my base chart. And to do that, I will again just duplicate these numbers here, only the number particles. And now I will call this one my lines. This will be small lines. And the lines particles, as they are set now, if I change this back from texture to circle, it will be a very big circle, of course, because the size is 65. And actually, I do not see them now, which is a little bit strange. And of course, I have to connect it to my emitter, otherwise nothing is happening. And now you see I have these huge circles, and maybe if you turn down the opacity, this could be quite a nice look to represent some data. But in my case, I don't want to use it as circles. I want to use it as lines. So I will just make these way smaller. So like 2. And now we will just add a replica node to create small lines out of these. And this is pretty simple because now I can just replicate these on the y-axis. So I offset them on y, something like 2. And let's see, put in 15. And I think it's the wrong direction again. Yes, so -2. And you see what this does. This just creates these little small lines here, or these dotted lines. And if I increase this spacing here to -3, we can see this even better. Now I can reduce the number here to get the length right. Let's set this to 13. Perfect. So to colorize these lines here, I can go to my replica node, and in the replica node we have this option here down here at along path properties, and you see we have this gradient, but you also see that right now this gradient has no effect on my particles, and here we have this color mix path live chart, and if I change this here, you see what will happen, and now it is mixing actually the along path with the already specified color. So if I just reduce this here, both of these, then we can specify the color using this gradient. And I can actually drag this down here to 0 and here to 0. And now we only can use this gradient here to specify the color of these particles. And that's actually what I want to do. So let me just use a bit different colors here, maybe something like that. And let me see, maybe something like that, just to get a bit interesting variation in here. Okay, and maybe I change this a bit so that it's not that violet, a bit more into the reds here. Okay, something like that. Okay, now one more little thing, because I am on the along path settings, I will also change the size a bit. So I want these to become a little bit smaller in the end, right here on top, like so. Not so much, maybe a bit, just to make this a little bit finer. And I think it looks good. Good, my lines are finished. Then I have these particles here. Everything is good. Now I want to add another set of custom particles. So if you're familiar with these stock charts, there are symbols that are representing also these sales and buy things. And I want to add a few of these in here now. And therefore we need to create a new composition because now we have to create custom particles on our own. And I will just call this my symbols. And I will make it 200 times 200 long. And actually we only need a few of these. So let's say 8 frames long. And now I will just create a quick shape layer. So just a rectangle here, something like that. Make sure that it is zeroed out. It's not that important, but just to keep it organized. Now I duplicate this rectangle and change the path here. So I want this to be smaller, but longer. So something like that is fine. Okay. And now I will just create a few of these. So let me duplicate this. And now I can just scale this down on the y-axis to create a different look here. I will just rush through this a bit to save some time. Duplicate this again. Create another one that's maybe a bit wider, but not too much. Actually, now it's on the wrong scale, so I need to scale this layer here. So maybe a bit wider, like so. Duplicate this again and scale this one way down. That's very small. Duplicate this again. Again, a bit of another scale. That we create a little bit of variation here. Duplicate this again. And make one a bit bigger. Duplicate it again. And let's make this bigger. And in the end, I will just add another small one. It's better if you use more small ones than bigger ones. It looks better. Something like that. Okay, you see what I've got here now, 8 different shapes here. And now let's go to our main comp and drag in this composition, the symbols that I created, and make it invisible. Now in Stardust, I will just create another set of particles, and therefore I will use these lines here. So I will just duplicate the lines particle node, and I will rename this and call it my symbols. And this is already set, so I just have to link this, and I will change the circle to texture. And now we will specify our texture, and this time we will use the symbols here. And now we see nothing because they are very small again. So let's go to our particle size and increase this maybe to 40. Let's see what this does. And now you see we get the symbols in here. And it looks not too bad. Maybe I increase it to a bit more, 55. They're a bit bigger. That looks quite good. And now I could just leave them exactly where they are. Then they represent exactly these numbers here. But actually I do not want this. I just want to make a bit more interesting visualizations with a bit more going on. So I will just randomize this a bit. So let's move down to these properties. I have way too many things open here. To this birth chance and the seed. So I will increase the birth chance a bit, maybe 33%, that there are a bit more of these, maybe even a bit more, 45. Yep, and now I will just shift them a bit. And I think that this looks quite good. And now I want to offset this a bit. And I want to offset these on Y, but also on Z. So it's a good time to introduce a camera to my scene. So let me create a new camera, and I want this to be something like a bit of a tele camera. So I will use the 80 preset for now. And now I can also use my custom view just to give this, just to see what's happening in 3D space here. And now let me shift these particles by using again a transform node. So we'll just add a transform node and link it to my symbols. And now I can shift them on Z. So let's see. I need some negative values here, maybe negative 50, not too much, just a little bit. And you see now they are in front of my chart and this looks pretty good. And I want to move them down just a little bit. So let's say I also want to add 50 here and that should move them down. That's too much actually, I think. So maybe only 20, but I will see this with my camera setup then. Okay, so now you see what we have got. We have this really nice animation and they are all animating in, scaling up, and this looks really cool. So I really like this so far. Now there's actually only one more thing to do, and I want to create this base that I had in here. And to create this, we just need to create another emitter, because this time I want to distribute the particles a bit different on my path. So let's duplicate the emitter here. Now we have the second emitter. And I also need some particles here, so I will just duplicate my first set of particles. And I will relink them. Now let's change a few settings here. First of all, in the second emitter, I want to change the path properties. So I want the distribution to be, the subdivision here to be a little bit smaller, like 10. And you see that this creates a bit more particles. Actually, maybe let's set it down to 5, because I will make these way smaller. And the bit of a problem that we have, it's not a problem, but you see now, of course, I have to change the particles per second so that the animation is still working the same as the other one. So let's increase this count here until we get to more or less the same result that we have right now. So this is way too much. Maybe something like 40. I could calculate this actually. I'm too lazy for now. And 30, you see 30 looks pretty good. Now we are more or less in the same spot. If I increase this to 33, then I'm probably 32, then I'm probably really there. Yeah, like that. That's okay. So now these are also animating nicely along the path. Now I want to add, first of all, a replica here, because I want to create this kind of 3D distribution, this kind of a plane. And therefore I will use a few replicates, let's say 10, and I will offset them on X for something like maybe 5. And we'll see what this does in a moment. And you see that this creates this strange look. And of course, I do not want to offset them on X. I want to offset them on Z, of course. So let's put in 10 here. Let's see how this looks like. Not too bad. A little bit too much. 7. Okay. Now let's go to the particles and let's make these particles smaller. So 1 in size. And now this looks pretty good. And now I can shift these. So let's use a transform node, link it. And now I want to move this down. So we will move these down on Y. And I think something like 40 should work. And I also moved this on Z a little bit, so I will use minus 30 here. And to make this really a bit more obvious, I will change to 4 views for a moment, and now I can take a look where they are sitting, and they are not really in the middle, so I have to increase this. So Z minus 50. It's too much. Minus 40. Damn it. Minus 35. Yeah, this is exactly what I want. So sorry. Now I've got my line sitting directly in the middle of this base here. Okay, and let's see, where are the other particles sitting? So the front particles here doesn't look too bad. If I check out my side view here, you see it's not too bad. I think that it looks pretty cool. Okay, so we're nearly done here. Well, one more thing that we have to do is we have to create a quick camera movement. So let's do that. And to create a camera movement, I will use a cam control layer. And you're probably already familiar with this technique. Therefore, I will create a new null object and make this a 3D layer. And now I will just parent my camera to this. Call it cam control, colorize both of these. So to create a nice animation along our path, I will first of all separate my dimensions here on my cam control layer. This makes it a bit easier to animate this because we only need X and Y. And now I will just create a quick animation path. So let me just start right in the end here, because then we see our path here. And let's shift the position here to the end of our path, approximately, not quite, you know, something like that should be fine. And move it up so that it is somewhere near our chart. Let's say something like that should be good. And now I will create a keyframe for both of these here. Now I will just move forward, just that I can see, because when I put this right here, then my path is gone and I do not know where I am heading. So let's now turn this down here. So we go, let's say, to 0, and right here maybe to 1000. Not too bad, but not quite good. So let's move it up a bit. And let's move it over here. Okay, now let's take these keyframes and let's move them over here to the beginning of my animation. And I also want these to end at about 17 seconds. Or whenever my chart reaches this, so maybe even earlier, no, later, yeah. So that it is just following along here, approximately. Something like that should be fine. And now the problem is that this is a straight line, but actually this needs to be a little bit bent because my chart is not a straight line. So right here, I have to bring it down. So I will just bring it down like this. And now I can select all of these keyframes and press F9 to make these easy ease keyframes. And now let's activate our graph editor and make this a little bit more beautiful. I want to just work on Y for now, so I just select Y. Okay, so this doesn't look too bad. Let me see how I can change this a bit to get a bit of a smoother curve here. Maybe drag it up a little bit, just like that. Let's see how it looks in the end. Could work, not quite sure. Let me just try it out. I will now just rotate this thing here. So rotate it for 45 degrees. And now I want to bring in my camera just closer to my chart, and let's say something like 750 minus 750. Now we are nice close. That's too much, actually, too close. So minus 900. Okay, and let's see how this looks like. And you see now our camera is traveling along this path quite nicely, following it. And we have this really nice build-up animation. In the end, we lose it a bit, but it's not too bad. And the only thing I need to do now is to activate my background. So let's activate this background. And now you see it is a little bit intersecting with my chart. So we'll just go into my settings here, and I can just shift this emitter a bit and just move it back on set a little bit so that it is behind my chart. And to make it even more interesting, as a last step, let's colorize this here, adding a field. And we'll do this quite fast now. And I want to add color map, and I want to use color, and from emitter, and let's say we want to use a preset here, this one here, apply. So affect the color, and you see now we are projecting this color here along our background. And there's only one thing I have to do in my number particles, that are these ones here. I have to change the texture options from default color to alpha, and then they will be also colorized. So as a last step, I will now create a quick RAM preview that we see what we've got, and I will be back when this is finished. Okay, so the RAM preview is finished, and it lasted only a few seconds, and you see that it's quite a cool, complex animation with a lot of particles. So Stardust is really powerful with these complex particle digital setups here. I really like them. And I think it's not too bad. I could spend a little bit more time on the camera animation, on the timing, but this is up to you. If you have any questions, then feel free to contact me either in the comments or through my website, which is www.graphicinmotion.com. You can also follow me along on Facebook or on Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.